Hello, this is Steve Sherbet again at A Place at Home Home Care. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the differences between home care agencies and home care registries. There is a very big difference between the two, and while I know some of you probably know some of the differences between them, maybe there are a few more here that you weren't aware of. A home care agency employs its caregivers and assigns them out to various clients to do specific jobs and tasks within the home. It's an effort to keep the senior population aging at home as long as possible. And then once they get to a point where we need to, then we would refer them out to, senior living alternative, assisted living community, or nursing home, or independent living community out there. A nurse registry doesn't actually employ its caregivers. They are kind of a staffing agency for independent contractors. So they will assign two or three of them to be interviewed by the client if they're selected as the company to provide services. So the hiring becomes the burden actually of the client. They have to vet them and they take the risks that go along with the hiring decisions. The second issue is often training, where we continually do in-service trainings. We also have software packages like Relias, where they can go on there, and if we're assigning them to a Parkinson's patient, they can go on and watch some CEU videos and learn about the type of disability or issue that the client may have that we're assigning them to. So they go in more trained and ready to rock and roll. The training for a nurse registry is really up to the client. The client would have to decide what it is that the caregiver knows or needs to know to do the job correctly. Sometimes you get somebody that's got the experience, sometimes you don't. But at the end of the day, how well they're trained is up to the client or the client's family. Supervision, it is up to a family member or the client to supervise, which means that if they don't quite know what they're doing day to day, they've got to go worry about the schedule and what's getting accomplished, what's not getting accomplished. They've got to constantly be checking in to find out if the things that need to be done are actually being done and if they're being done properly. They have got to stay on top of the person coming in late or leaving a little early or sleeping while they're on assignment perhaps. It in large degree depends on if the family is local or if the family is out of town. There are greater or lesser degrees of things that can happen that are going to be a negative experience for them. The next thing is backup. Things happen. And the truth of it is, if a caregiver calls out because they've got a sick child or they've got an issue themselves, it's then up to the family or the client to find a suitable replacement, either for short-term or long-term, whatever the challenges are that they're being faced with by the caregiver that they've had working in the home. So finding backups oftentimes on the spur of a moment can be a challenge, especially if the client is someone that can't be left alone. The next one would be termination replacement. If a caregiver is not acting up to par and needs to be let go, there's that experience of having to terminate someone and then find a replacement for them on top of it. So those are some issues that can draw some angst for a lot of people. Things like payroll taxes, paying a caregiver isn't just an under-the-table 1099 sort of thing. So if you're hiring an independent caregiver and you're not charging taxes, then you're actually out there violating labor laws and things like that. With the nurse registries, oftentimes they leave it up to the individual caregiver. They may provide some moderate amount of assistance, but for someone that's making, $12, $13, $14 an hour to try and calculate into what they're charging to cover not only their own personal obligation for payroll taxes, they've also got to calculate an owner's share of the payroll taxes. So while they think maybe they're making a couple dollars extra an hour, they find out, sadly, at the end of the year, that their tax burden is much greater than what it ought to be. And so that oftentimes can breed some challenges where, a caregiver will underreport their income or not report their income at all, not file taxes at all, and that can create some challenges. Then you've got things like work-related injuries. The client is faced with homeowners claims if somebody gets injured in the home. Many of these independent caregivers are not covered under any insurances. They have no recourse that would protect the client or the client's family from any kind of a work-related injury, whether that be to the patient or whether that be to the caregiver themselves. And that's a big pill to swallow if you're faced with that and didn't anticipate it. Discipline. Uh, if a caregiver is doing something they shouldn't be doing, or if a caregiver, God forbid, should write a check to themselves or take passwords online and use them for purposes that they weren't intended for. Uh, who is going to discipline that caregiver? Who's going to um, supervise and find these things out and either put the caregiver on probation or terminate them or have a counseling session if they're showing up late or leaving early? The safety of the loved one is another big issue. Who is going to oversee, do the spot checks and check in to make sure that, God forbid, that the client is always being kept in a safe, sound sort of a situation, especially if there's transport involved. If it's transport to a doctor's visit or transport to the grocery store or shopping, there's a safety concern there. Who's going to check and make sure there's auto insurance that's current and driver's licenses that are current, and that the registration with ACA and the background checks and things like this are being done appropriately. And then the last one would be hidden costs. The hidden costs that come from not knowing what any of the previous situations are going to bring. You may end up needing to seek the services of an accountant or, cover some sort of an issue with the labor board or with, the IRS that you weren't anticipating. And oftentimes, if you separate with a caregiver and that caregiver is less than delighted with the situation, then they file unemployment claims and they report things that may or may not have been accurate during the employment period. So you end up sometimes with those additional hidden costs that you just didn't foresee because the relationship breaks down in ways that it didn't necessarily need to or you didn't necessarily anticipate. So with all of these sorts of things to think about that you don't get faced with when you have a healthcare agency, brings a lot more peace of mind, a lot more ability to relax and know that the person you've referred or your family member is safe and sound and well taken care of, and there are other people out there stepping in and overseeing what's going on in the home. It's just a lot more peace of mind. So keep that in mind when you're doing a discharge and you're counseling a patient and you're referring them out for a dual discharge. Maybe they're going to get some in-home health skilled services, and then they also need a home care agency. That an agency is setting them up for comfort and safety and peace of mind, whereas another alternative may bring unforeseen baggage that you didn't think about in advance. Okay, best wishes. Hope this has provided you with a little bit of insight that is helpful for you, and I will see you down the road somewhere soon.